As Dave said, I'm CEO of Goodwill, so thank you donors, thank you shoppers. I'm actually wearing Goodwill today, Nordstrom, Banana Republic. I've got Hickey Freeman in the closet and a bunch of Ferragamo ties. So even you fancy pants shoppers can find some good stuff, and make sure to donate the good stuff. But what you may not know, obviously many of you know us from our stores, but what you may not know is we are the largest nonprofit provider of workforce development services in the country. Job training, job support, and job placement. And what I would like to talk to you, so for the last 15 months, we've been talking about this so much. There is so much upheaval, so much transition on so many levels in our country. It continues to happen. It's hitting us in so many places. But another trend that maybe a lot of us haven't focused on a lot has been happening pretty quietly, and it has very significant implications for all of us, which is what I'll call a widening opportunity gap. And this opportunity gap could have very significant implications for poverty, for equity, and for any number of issues in society. And what I'm talking about is opportunity for people who may not be able to avail themselves of opportunity because they lack traditional educational degrees or traditional certifications, because of embedded hiring practices that may block them from opportunities that they actually might be qualified for, or people who've come from difficult places that really just don't even get a look. And so today I'd like to talk a little bit about what some of the trends are that we see, the risks and opportunities for society as a result, some of what we're doing about it at Goodwill, but then I'd like to talk a little bit about the implications for all of us as employers as we think about providing opportunity to individuals and developing a richer culture in our organizations. Now, Goodwill was founded almost 120 years ago by a minister in Boston who was very committed to the poor. At that time, it was primarily an immigrant community that he was serving. And he began collecting clothing to provide to the poor who needed it. And what he realized is that if he could employ those people to repair the clothing and launder it and resell it, he'd actually have a business that could provide them with meaningful jobs, the dignity of work, and over time he became incredibly committed to this notion of ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to reach their full potential through work and through those types of opportunities. Now, Goodwill has grown to become very large in this space. We employ over 120,000 people. Many of the people in the stores are people that come to us with various life challenges, and that's sort of their first meaningful opportunity. But we also serve over 1 million people in workforce development centers across the country, and about 20 million people online who come online to take targeted courses and even get job placement support online. The people we serve are broad and varied, but generally people with lower levels of education, 80% with a high school degree or less, but also nearly 60% are people of color. Many other people groups, tens of thousands of people who've come out of incarceration, people with disabilities, and people going through transitions, like veterans. And we provide any number of services. Sometimes it's kind of a very pocketed, focused support to help somebody find a job that they need and can qualify for, but sometimes it's a very long journey, many months, for example, in our reentry programs, where we take people through a much more rigorous, longer-term process. Now, I want to pivot to what's happening in the labor market. Now, think if you can, before COVID. Most of us have a hard time with all that's happened. But even before COVID, if you look at what was happening from the time that we were rebounding from the financial crisis to pre-COVID, we were seeing that the jobs that were coming back, 2/3 of them required medium to higher level digital skills. Okay, so higher level skills for the jobs that were being created. As we sat before COVID, companies were saying that over half of their employees, and this is the graphic you see on the right, half of their employees would need significant upskilling to remain in the jobs that they had today. And that graphic shows you on the bottom anywhere from a month to over a year worth of reskilling would be required. And then at that point, when we pivoted forward to the next decade, McKinsey Global came out and said they believed that 16% of global occupations would be automated. And I'm going to stick with McKinsey statistics throughout the presentation for continuity, but if you look at any number of other think tanks or economists, the predictions were very similar. Well, then COVID hit, and of course, shortly after the onslaught of the pandemic, 22 million fewer people were working. heavily affecting people with lower levels of education, lower income, people from racial and ethnic minorities, and also women. And as we stand here today, our workforce still has about 7 million fewer people. Now, I know all of us, all of you, me, we all feel this incredible crunch. We're trying to hire labor. It feels like everything's coming back. It feels like we're kind of getting back to a great place. But underlying that near-term trend is an acceleration of the longer-term trend we saw before COVID. And the World Economic Forum came out because of the research that they do to see that because of COVID, the skills gap has actually broadened and the need to close it has become more urgent. Now, during COVID, once again, McKinsey Global Institute reached out to executives all around the world to say, how is this affecting your business? Because we want to understand how that relates to labor trends. And what they found was over 2/3 of corporate executives around the world said that they were accelerating their adoption of automation and artificial intelligence. And in addition, they were already accelerating their adoption of any number of digital platforms, mostly employer-related, we all know that, we all lived on Zoom, but also customer interaction, supply chain support. And late last year, they predicted that the adoption of digital capabilities has accelerated 2 to 3 years only within that first several months of the pandemic. And so then they pivoted and said, what does the next decade look like? Now that we adjust our thinking, what they said, we think actually the worker displacement is going to go up 20%, 17 million jobs will need to transition. And if you look at this graphic up here, what you'll see on the left is the jobs going away based on these predictions are generally lower skilled jobs, and the jobs being created are higher skilled jobs. And in addition, what this doesn't show is this need for upskilling and reskilling of the existing jobs continues. Now, I want to pause and say, you know, innovation is great, right? Innovation makes us all more competitive, especially in a competitive global economy. And so there's a lot of good here. The other thing I want to acknowledge is we're not talking about a net reduction in jobs. We're actually seeing the jobs that are being created being better jobs and higher paying jobs. But what we have to ask ourselves, as our companies succeed, will our people succeed as well? Will they be able to share in that prosperity? And that's the topic we're concerned about here. And so as you look at these trends, do we see opportunities or do we see risk? Because this trend could have very significant implications for equity and opportunity, especially for people who haven't enjoyed either of those. It could have extremely impactful implications for public policy. Think about labor policy. Think about entitlement spending. Think about even immigration or trade policy, and even potentially restrictions on automation. And it's not hard when you think about our current political environment to think about the pull and tug that could ensue. It has serious implications for global competitive. Our labor force is probably our strongest asset. You all are having a hard time hiring today. Think about down the road the value of having a tooled labor force versus not. And then finally, I think something that hits us all deeply is the implications for individuals, families, and their communities. Long-term joblessness exacts a terrible toll on people and communities. People who've been unemployed for a while, if they do re-enter the labor force, typically earn less. They tend to have poorer health, their children have weaker academic outcomes, and the communities in which they live have higher rates of violence and crime, and the ripples in the pond continue from there. In addition, I think some of these factors are probably what was embedded in the Pope's thinking when he said that really there's no worse material poverty than the poverty that prevents a person from earning a living and from the dignity of work. Now, we at Goodwill believe that work is special, right? Beyond just being something that provides a paycheck and financial well-being, it's a place where we are productive. It's a place where we bring our gifts. It's a place where we live in community and develop relationships, which are so important. It's a place where we can develop and grow, and it's a place where we find dignity. And I think ultimately, certainly for me, it's a place where I feel like I flourish. And I think all of us want that, right? We all want to flourish. And so work is just different. Now, this mission has particular importance to me, partially because I've spent a lot of my time philanthropically, volunteer in the government, working with a lot of the people we're talking about, but also my personal story is such that my father grew up very poor. He was born in a coal mining camp in eastern Kentucky, ninth of 11 children, and the whole family lived in this little four-room shack, no heating, no plumbing, and he left school right after ninth grade to go work in the foundries. And he met my mother. My mother was also very different background, but equally challenging, came together, had a big family, and you can imagine some of the challenges that ensued. But so for me, in life, it was sort of like, you know, the Red Sea parted, without a lot of detail. And on the other side of that dry pathway was sort of the land of opportunity. And I was able to enjoy a life that not only I didn't imagine, but a life that I didn't even know existed. And so I would like you now to see a story from one of our participants who also was on a journey where she started out at a much more difficult place, where she didn't really have visibility for what life could offer. But through investing in herself and through opportunity, found herself at a very different place. So meet Chelsea Rucker, a mother of two from Nashville. There we go.
The most important thing about being a mother is leading by example. What do you do when you have nothing? A year ago, I found myself homeless with my daughters. The whole shelter experience. For the kids, I kept telling them that we were just on vacation and waiting for the house to be ready. That's the worst thing I ever had to do. I grew up in the housing projects in East Nashville, so nobody ever talked about career paths. I didn't know what to do or where to go, but I kept saying, they're watching how you handle this. You have a serious example to set for these girls. Most people think that Goodwill is just a retail store, but it's so much more than that. While I was living at the shelter, I found out that Goodwill and Google actually have a program to provide IT training. The program is called the IT Support Professional Certificate. When I learned that I could get a scholarship through Goodwill, it was life-changing.
Chelsea is the kind of person Goodwill was designed to support. That's why, thanks to the assistance of Google.org, we started the Goodwill Digital Career Accelerator. Using tools and resources from Grow with Google, the Goodwill Digital Career Accelerator is focused on connecting more than 1 million people with the skills they need to advance in digital careers. The Google IT Support Professional Certificate was a great building block for this.
I joined the 4 a.m. club. I would get up while the girls were asleep and do my schoolwork. While I was studying, I learned that a Google representative was going to come and give a tech talk at Goodwill. I had to go.
Chelsea really stood out when I met her at the Goodwill event. So I asked her to send me a resume. During the interview process, Chelsea demonstrated not only the foundational technical knowledge that she developed, but her initiative. And that's exactly what we need for people that are working in our data centers. So we brought her on board.
I absolutely love my job. When I first got the job, my daughter, she was like, "Mom, you got this job? That means we'll have a house forever."
The future of work is now, and it requires digital skills. In the year that we've been working with Google.org, we've seen more than 250,000 people build their digital skills.
A year ago, I wasn't sure where my life was going. I thought everything was falling apart. I feel hopeful about the future now. I want my daughters to know that they can achieve any goal that they can set for themselves. My goal is to be a developer. That's what I want to do. I've come this far. I plan to go to the stars. My name is Chelsea Rucker, and I'm a data center technician for Google.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. What it doesn't say, she's also started a nonprofit to help other people. So I want to talk now, going forward a little bit, some of what we're doing. I'm going to cover this very briefly. But as we look at the challenges going forward, we're committed to providing extensive support to the Goodwill network to be able to be much more effective in helping the Chelseas in our world. And what we're delivering is a framework of support supported by any number of tools and capabilities that'll be delivered through a digital platform. And the journey, the support looks like this. When somebody comes through the door at a Goodwill, the most important first thing you can do is assess that person and understand where they want to go, where they are today, and how to develop that pathway. So where are they in terms of skill and in terms of life needs and in terms of other kinds of supports they need? And from that, we develop a journey plan. And in that middle box, we call that the equip phase. And for Chelsea, that was a phase where she was provided with digital skills. In her case, it might have been housing support or childcare for her children or other kinds of services. And then as you move through that phase, is when we move into the final phase, which is career placement, which could be resume support or interview skills training or just the whole sort of job search process. So that whole continuum of support is critical, especially for people who really don't have a vision for how to navigate this process or where to go. And we're building all of these capabilities to be delivered digitally through a unified platform to our affiliates across the country. And we just kicked off a huge campaign to begin building this, and we're really thrilled about it. So you all are in that last box. You're in that career placement box. So let's talk a little bit about how people are thinking about this right now. How people are thinking about their role in broadening opportunity for people. First of all, hire for skills instead of degrees. Skills are acquired through many means, through job experience, through various targeted trainings, in many cases just through life skills. And what companies are realizing is that many people, millions of people, are shut out of jobs because either job descriptions or hiring specs require a degree that is really not necessary for the job. And at the end of last year, 80 major companies through the Business Roundtable came forward and committed to looking at all of their job descriptions and specs to ensure that they were broadening the aperture for the people that they hired. Secondly, and I think this is just by virtue of your being here, I think most of you are committed to this, but embrace a diverse workforce and believe in the value of it. I've been in so many situations where people say, we've got to do this, let's check this box or whatever. There is such documented deep value. Companies with diverse workforces are known to be more innovative, more creative. They show better financial results. They have much richer employee cultures and represent something to their people and their communities that is very powerful. And then finally, as you think about those individuals who come to you, consider a couple of things. Number one, consider the value of that job to the person, because you may be confronting people for whom that job represents an entirely different pathway in life. But also, realize the value to you of an employee who is, in many cases, more loyal, more committed, sees a value in that job that's just different, and brings that ethos to the market, to the workplace. And if you need any convincing of that, take a look at companies like Dave's Killer Bread. Dave's Killer Bread is committed to hiring a certain percentage of their workforce from people who've been incarcerated. And the studies they've done have actually shown that those are some of the best people in their workforce because of many of the factors I mentioned. So for all of us, as we think about, and as you think about your role in being able to narrow that opportunity gap, ask yourself where you're going to find your next great hire. Thank you.